Hello, curious. When it comes to the science world, one of the greatest minds whose name is known far and wide is certainly Albert Einstein. To this day, the theoretical physicist's name is synonymous with genius, and his work has allowed expansion upon theories that had been put forth by Isaac Newton, which in turn allowed future scientists to advance their own work. When it comes to his personal life, the man had to flee his native country as the Third Reich rose to power. However, while some people are familiar with that part of his life, as well as his work, the tragic story about the life of his son is one that is not as talked about. But who exactly was the physicist's family? How many children did he have? Why did his youngest son Edward spend over 3 decades in an asylum while his family left for the US? Stay with us until the very end to find out all about the overlooked son of Albert Einstein. Though before we continue, don't forget to hit the notification and subscription button to stay up to date with our videos about the odd, scary and scandalous. Before we delve into the family of the physicist, let's look into his early life. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879 in Ulm, in the Kingdom of Württemberg, which at this time was part of German Empire. The man was born into a family of secular Ashkenazi Jews, which is why later in his life, during Hitler's reign, he had to leave the country. A year after he was born, the family relocated to Munich, where young Albert grew up. He later moved to Switzerland to continue with his education, and after renouncing his German citizenship to avoid military service, he went on to start a 4-year mathematics and physics teaching diploma program. And that is where he met his future wife, a 20-year-old Serbian woman named Mileva Maric. She was enrolled at the same polytechnic school as he was and was the only woman among the 6 students in the mathematics and physics department. Over the next few years, her and Einstein's friendship developed into romance. Early correspondence between the couple was discovered and published in 1987, and from it was revealed that the pair had a daughter named Lieserl, who was born in early 1902 in Novi Sad, Serbia, where Mileva was staying with her parents. Later on, the woman would return to Switzerland, but without the child, whose real name and what happened to her are unknown. Letters written by Albert a year later suggested that she was either given up for adoption or passed away of scarlet fever in infancy. However, that was never confirmed. In January 1903, the couple had married, and a year later, their son Hans Albert was born in Bern, Switzerland. And later, in July 1910, the two had yet another child, a son whom they named Edward. It was when the youngest son was 4 that the family had relocated to Berlin, though they did not stay there as a family for long, as Maric soon returned to Zurich with their sons after she found out that despite their close relationship, Albert was still romantically attracted to his cousin Elsa Lowenthal, whom he would go on to marry in 1919. Einstein and Mileva had divorced in February 1919, to have already lived apart for 5 years as per an agreement. But while many see Einstein as this brilliant physicist, what was he like in the role of a father? According to reports from various biographers, already during their marriage and even more so after their separation, Mileva would often lament that the famous father of her children would often put his science before his family, and that it was often seen more important to him than anything else. However, this is something that his oldest son Hans, who would go on to become an engineer, would later deny when he recalled the time with his dad. Speaking about the time when he and his brothers were younger, he said that their father would put aside his work and watch over us for hours, while their mother was busy with working around the house. Despite many biographers previously quoting correspondence that seemed to suggest Einstein was a bad father and a rather cold relative, in a 2006 release of close to 1,400 previously unknown letters from the scientist, they offered a better look and understanding of him as a family man. They had shown that Albert had compassion and empathy for his first wife and their children even after their separation, even offering them a portion of his 1921 Nobel Peace Prize winnings to support them. But speaking of the scientist's children, let us now look at his youngest son, who many claim has been abandoned by his family. Edward was a sickly child from the very start of his life. As biographers noted in books, his early years were often marked by periods where he was so ill that it resulted in him not being able to join the family on different trips or various activities. Though despite the fact that the story of the youngest son isn't as known as Albert's genius, and the fact that he was reported to have been a cult father, the truth was a bit different. Einstein was a caring dad when it came to Edward, and he despaired over his son even after he had separated from his mother and left the family. In one letter, which had been dated to 1917, he sent to a colleague, the physicist wrote, "My little boy's condition depresses me greatly. It is impossible that he would become a fully developed person." Though despite caring for him, past letters also show that Albert was plagued by some rather dark thoughts where Edward was concerned. So while like any parent, Einstein worried about his son and wanted him to get better and be able to enjoy life to the fullest, there was a coldly scientific part of him that had wondered if it wouldn't be better for him if he could depart before coming to know life properly. But from further writing, it seems that the paternal love won and the genius put those dark thoughts aside, vowing to do whatever he could and whatever was in his power to help his sick son. As a result, Albert would often pay for and even accompany Edward on trips and stays to various sanatoriums throughout his childhood, and he would often affectionately dub him Tete from the French word petite, which means small. Despite all odds, the youngest Einstein boy did not succumb to his poor health and grew older. Over time, he had ended up developing many different interests in things such as poetry, piano playing, and eventually psychiatry. When it came to that field, he was particularly fond of, some would even say worshipped, the Austrian neurologist and founder of psychoanalysis Sigmund Freud. Due to his fascination with the topic, the young man followed in his father's footsteps and enrolled at the Zurich University, although he chose to study psychiatry. By that time, Albert's fame had already been solidly established in the scientific circles, and it seems as it might have actually bothered Edward a little, as in one letter sent to a friend he wrote, "It is at times difficult to have such an important father, because one feels so unimportant." But he did not let his father's fame discourage him, and the young Einstein had continued with his studies, yet soon enough he would once again follow in his dad's footsteps. And all because he ended up falling in love with an older woman at the university, but unlike his father, which resulted in marriage and children, for Edward this relationship ended disastrously, though there were no details recorded as to why that happened. And according to records, it was around that time that his mental health took a severe turn for the worse as well. And while some noted that the end of the relationship was like the nail in the coffin, the young student was set into a downward spiral that ended with an attempt to end his own life in 1930. It was then that the youngest of Einstein's children was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it had since been speculated that the harsh treatments of the era had worsened rather than eased his condition. According to records from that time, his condition had worsened so much that it had impacted his speech and cognitive abilities. While it surely was not an easy news for the family to receive, for his part, Albert had believed that his son's condition was hereditary and that it was passed down through generations, in this case, as he reasoned, from his mother's side of the family. Though many biographers later noted that his scientific observations didn't help the physicist with grief and the guilt that he was feeling. His second wife Elsa would remark in a letter that the sorrow was eating Albert up, and while he was facing issues with regards to his youngest son, soon there were other problems that were added to his life. All because by the early 1930s, the Nazi Party had risen in Europe, and after Hitler took power in 1933, Einstein could not return to the Prussian Academy of Sciences in Berlin, where he had been working since 1914. As we mentioned earlier in the story, the famous scientist was Jewish, and given that this was something that some of his countrymen could not accept, especially with Adolf Hitler in power, the man and his family were forced to flee to the United States that very same year. Although Albert had hoped that his younger son would be able to join him in America along with his older brother, Edward's continually deteriorating mental condition had prevented him from being able to seek refuge in the US, which meant that ultimately he had to be left behind. Though while some were quick to criticize Einstein for making such a decision, the famous scientist did not abandon his son completely. Before he fled the country, Albert went to visit his son at the asylum where he had been cared for one last time. Although he later would keep up a correspondence and would continue to lend money for his son's care, the father and son would not meet again. Edward had spent over 3 decades of his life in the psychiatric clinic at Bergen-Zollern at the University of Zurich, and the remainder of his life was spent in the asylum in Switzerland, and he was buried in Hongerberg Cemetery in the Swiss city after he passed away as a result of a stroke at the age of 55 in October 1965, 10 years after his father. So curious, while Einstein was known for his brilliant mind, were you aware of his past? Did you know about his family life? What are your thoughts about him leaving his son behind while he fled the country? And can you think of other well-known and even beloved historical figures that have a dark past? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.